So hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Thank you for joining today's IAM Online. Again, this is our monthly webinar focused around identity and access management, brought to you by InCommon and Internet 2. My name is Netta Caligari, InCommon Community Success Manager, and I'm really happy to be hosting this hour that we're here together. In just a moment, I will introduce our wonderful presenter for today. Just a couple of quick notes before we dive in. Heather will be taking questions and comments using the live Zoom chat function. So please, if you have any comments, feedback, questions as she's going through this presentation, we want to make sure this is as interactive as possible for you. So please feel free to use that chat and just send it to everyone so we can all keep an eye on those questions that come through. We also are recording this webinar and it will be posted to our IAM Online YouTube channel this week following the presentation. So if you need to hop off or want to go back and get a refresher, this content will be available for you soon. So let's go ahead and get into it. We have a really great session lined up for you today. And in fact, this was one of our more popular presentations that we had during our camp week, which was the first week in October. So we thought, you know what, why not have an encore? And Heather was more than willing to be accommodating and step in and share her expertise again. So regardless of whether you attended camp earlier this year and already sat in and heard some of these concepts before, or this is going to be new to you, I think you'll get a lot of great information from it packed into our hour here together. So we're really thankful for everyone who was able to join us live. And without further ado, I am going to go ahead and hand it over to Heather Flanagan. She is the principal at Spherical Cow Consulting, and today she's going to be discussing browser changes and identity on the web, which again was a spinoff from her presentation during Camp Week. Titled Browser Changes and the Impact on Federated Identity. So without further ado, Heather, you can take it away.
Thank you, Netta. So this is, as she said, a refreshed already version of the talk that I did at camp, which was a refreshed version of the talk that I did for publishers, which was a refreshed talk I did for R&E federations, because this space is changing pretty darn quickly. And so practically every month, there's something else that's going on that I can and want to update people on. But I'm going to assume that not everybody has seen the previous sessions, so there'll be a little bit of background material first. So the game plan for today, talk about what's the problem here, because this sounds pretty vague. I want to make sure you understand when we talk about tracking on the web, what does that mean? What are we looking at? I want to talk about the timing of changes that are happening and the different development activities that the browser vendors are doing, and then talk about next steps. So the general problem statement is that the non-transparent, uncontrollable tracking of users across the web is a no good, very bad thing. It's an impact to privacy. It's one group called it actually an attack on the internet. And everybody from the browser vendors themselves to legislative bodies like the European Commission via the GDPR has said this has got to stop. It's kind of motherhood and apple pie in the online digital age. And that's great, except there's a little bit of a problem. And that is when it comes to federated identity, because a lot of the basic building blocks used on the web, which are used by entities that are doing the kind of tracking we're trying to prevent, are in fact the same building blocks used to enable federated identity. So, okay, if you want the really short version, then at this point, I can tell you that authentication that uses SAML, which is a large part, but not the entirety of higher education, that's going to continue to work as designed for the next couple of years, with the exception of global logout, which is very hard to implement anyway, and it does depend on how someone implemented it, if they did it at all. Authentication that uses OpenID Connect is partially breaking. To throw in some technical terms here, where you're doing front channel stuff via iframes, you're going to have a problem. There are services out there, like many of you will have heard of Seamless Access, which is a where are you from discovery enablement service to help people find their identity providers. That uses browser local storage in a manner similar to third-party cookies. That's going to have a problem, already does. And other things that use frames in new and interesting ways, like Microsoft Teams. For those of you who are here from the enterprise space and have to deal with Teams, you're already starting to see some problems there, more than likely. If you are here from higher education and you have learning management systems like Blackboard, you're probably going to see some problems too. This is really starting to split based on which browser you're talking about, but it's definitely starting to be an issue. And there's other features out there that are already breaking. We're not talking just authentication per se, but anything that enables tracking is currently being addressed and in some ways blocked. And we'll get into a little bit more detail on that in a moment. So there's a couple things to remember when going through all of this. So the main browser vendors that we worry about, such as Google and Apple and Mozilla, also known as Chrome, Safari, and Firefox, they're either really, really big or not particularly well funded. And that has implications. It means that their priorities aren't always obvious. They're not always internally consistent. I would particularly point to Google and Apple on that one because Google is so big. How big is it? It's so big that there's so many departments working in this space. They don't necessarily know what each other are doing, and they don't have the same priorities. So it's very hard to say, what is Google doing? Instead, you can say, well, what's the Google Chrome team doing? Or what's the Google IDP team doing? And Apple has a similar problem. So there's some implications to what that means in the browser development space. The next thing to remember is that the browser vendors are, they're looking at what's their biggest single use case. And by far and away, it's the consumer web. That's what they think about. That's what they know. SAML is not a big deal in the consumer web space. There's a fun saying where people keep saying SAML is dead. Long live SAML, because the consumer web doesn't use it. That means the browser vendors don't understand some other pretty big sectors like government, academia, financial technology, also known as fintech, healthcare. Those are not their area of expertise. And while they have departments that, all they do is interface with, say, academia, the communication doesn't necessarily happen back to the folks that are working on the browsers. And last but not least, bless their hearts, but there's no single organization, no matter how big and how well funded, that can test all the different use cases. So they are still learning about what's breaking. And frankly, anyone that can step in and say, we're willing to test and offer feedback is going to be heard much more clearly than perhaps the size of their industry might otherwise support. So think about that. If you've got any ability to help the browser vendors test, they'll hear you more. A little bit of background knowledge. This is actually important, especially if you are worried about supporting the different browsers and different platforms. So when we talk about browsers, of course, we're talking about Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Edge, Brave. All of those browsers are built on top of an engine. And there are more browsers than there are browser engines. So the browser engines in question the big ones are Blink, Gecko, and WebKit. Chrome, Edge, and Brave are all built on top of Blink. Gecko is what Firefox is built on, and WebKit. WebKit is the fun one because all browsers on an Apple iOS or iPadOS device, I don't care if it's Chrome or Firefox or anything else, they all must be built on WebKit. And so they have the same features and limitations that Safari does in that case. So when you're testing and when someone says I'm using Chrome, you also need to dive into, well, what's your operating system really? What are you looking at this on? Because that will change the nature of the browser. Okay, so tracking. How does tracking actually even happen? We all sort of think we know, but I'm going to make sure that we've got some common baseline to talk about that. So third-party cookies, and I'll talk a bit about what those are. IP addresses, these are a big deal, particularly in the higher education space. Browser fingerprinting, link decoration, and bounce tracking. So cookies, num num cookies. There are different kinds of cookies out there. There are, and for the sake of our discussion, there are things called first-party cookies that are written by one domain and only accessible by the domain that wrote it. Those are fine. Nobody cares about those, except, of course, the domain that's actually writing them. Third-party cookies. Now that's written by a domain and can be accessible to any other domain that cares to look. That is a big target for trackers. They love that. Setting the cookies, reading the cookies, figuring out where you've been, and adjusting their advertising or messaging appropriately. IP addresses. So these are used to identify machines and or services. They're often used to make authorization decisions, particularly on higher education campuses and your libraries. Your libraries use this all the time. IP addresses were never designed for such things. And if you talk to the people who actually designed the space, which I have the honor and privilege of getting to do, and I tell them that this is how IP addresses are being used, they are shocked and appalled because that was never what they were designed for. But regardless, you let something out in the wild and who knows how it's going to be used later. This is a fact. IP addresses are used in this manner. Link decoration, what's that mean? Well, that's the method of when you type in your URL, if you see something like a question mark, UTM equals something, 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 that's called a link decoration. You're adding additional information to the URL that can be used for query strings. It can be used for authentication tokens, and it can be used for tracking. Of course, the browser can't tell the difference. It all looks the same to the browser. It just knows that there's something else that happened after the URL domain component, but it doesn't know the difference between a query string and a front channel token and tracking information, not so much. Browser fingerprinting. So this is the ability to track based on asking what browser is being used, what fonts are being used, what add-ons are being used, what security configuration is being used. And there's been some really interesting academic studies about, well, how close does that get you to knowing, whether it's the same person over and over again as they travel across the web? And the answer is pretty darn close. Unexpectedly close, I would say. I never really thought about just how unique everyone's browser setup is, but there you go. It is a thing. And last one we'll mention is bounce tracking. So this is something that users don't usually really see happen. It is used by trackers to get around the third party. It's a site that the user never actually went to. So of course they can't see the information in the browser, right? But what if you do something like a really small blip of information, really fast, user's not even going to see it, that bounces the user to that third party, making them a first party. The user has visited their site and then back to the intended location. That allows for a lot of interesting tracking information. However, it's also used by the OpenID Connect protocol to validate session information between an identity provider and in SAML, you'd call it a service provider. In OIDC language, you'd call it a relying party. Okay, so there's your quick information on what are the different mechanisms that can be used for tracking. There's a bunch. So what's changing right now? Remember, if it can be used for tracking, it's under consideration for redesign. The top of that list is third-party cookies. They're considered the most tractable of all the different mechanisms on how you might address it. The browser vendors do differ in terms of how they're prioritizing development to handle all of the different things that are considered technology that supports tracking. So things are happening at different rates, slightly different intensities, depending on what browser you're talking about. So let's go on a diet. Safari. Third-party cookies are already blocked by default. They have been for a while now. And I've also heard for a while now that when people are trying to use Teams via Safari, the end result is Microsoft's recommendation to just stop using Safari because they can't fix that. Other things like yes, when I say Safari, I do mean WebKit. Thank you for keeping me honest, Andy. Firefox, in this case, Gecko, if you want to be really particular about it. The third-party cookies are sort of kind of blocked. They're doing something called heuristics where they've set up a block list. And any of you who have ever supported email systems with spam filter lists and disallow lists, things like that, you're familiar with the ongoing exercise of it's a perpetual game of catch up because domains that spammers use can be registered faster than they can be added to any kind of disallow list that's out there. And so Firefox, is doing their best. They've got a couple of, they're updating this regularly, but this is one of the least well-funded of the browser vendors. And this is not something they want to support. They really want to find a better way to handle third-party cookies. And then there's Chrome, also known as Blink, if you're going to talk about the browser engine. And Chrome on the desktop intends to phase out third-party cookies starting in mid-2023 and completely by the end of that year. That said, they're going to have their what they call origin trials. They're going to have they're going to make the flag available in their beta versions by mid next year, 2022, so that developers can start testing to say what will this actually look like to us? What will we know is going to break? And that's something I encourage you all to keep an eye out for. I will certainly get the information out as broadly as I can to make sure people, when the origin trial opens, that to go look at this and start testing. Now, some of you who've been following this stuff may know that Google had originally said they were going to phase out third-party cookies much earlier than this and changed their mind. There are any number of reasons why they might have made that decision. In part because there were a lot of complaints, possibly in part because Google is not just a browser vendor, they're also an advertising network, and they probably found that this was going to be a little bit of a challenge for them. I mean, I suspect every reason you can think of, there was a department in Google that had that reason. So it's not just a straightforward, they did it because they did it because of, no pun intended, the whole alphabet. Okay, so what breaks when third-party cookies are gone? As I mentioned, depending on how a vendor has implemented it, SAML single logout could have a problem. For all of you who have implemented SAML infrastructures, you'll know that single logout is extraordinarily difficult, and it's rarely implemented well anyway. So how much of an impact this will have is unknown. Several OpenID Connect features will break, which I mentioned, the front channel logout, session management, anything that's iframe based. Some of you may turn around and say, well, wait, but there's companies like PayPal. PayPal uses this stuff. Are you telling me that they're willing to break PayPal? Why, yes, they are. They're absolutely willing to break PayPal. And it's one of those arguments that's really hard to fight against because the the flip side is, well, if we don't do this, are we continuing to enable tracking? We have to draw that line somewhere, and there's where that line is. IDP persistence will break. So some of the IDP discovery services, seamless access, that's going to start to have problems as well. In the case of seamless access, they have a smart button that service providers can put on their page, which will read, what did seamless access write here? Oh, it said that the last IDP chosen was Stanford University. And so whether you go to an Elsevier site or a Springer Nature site or a Wiley Press site, it can read that and say, access through Stanford University. That's a smart button. Well, the smart button is not going to be very smart anymore if we can't read the browser local storage space, because it's all the different domains trying to do the same thing. If you want to, really start experiencing, well, what is this going to look like in your environment? There's a couple things you can do. You can go ahead and test with Safari. That's one way to see what's going to be impacted by the loss of third-party cookies. If you want to emulate how Chrome is going to eventually break on the desktop, you can change your configuration to reject all third-party cookies, though because Chrome is working on some additional projects, that won't be as exact a match as it will be in Safari, because the Google teams are working on other projects that will allow third-party cookie type things in certain scenarios. Things called first-party sets, same-party cookies, and I'll talk a little bit about these in a minute, so hold that thought. IP addresses. Now, as I mentioned, in academia, your libraries are dependent on this. Probably at least a half to potentially 2/3 of their subscriptions are restricted to using only IP-based authorization models. Well, Apple earlier this year introduced the iCloud Privacy Relay, and right now it's part of a subscription, so it's not ubiquitous, but I think it's a good warning shot across the bow that says they're going to go ahead and anonymize the IP address for you, so it maps to a region but not to an actual location. It's running through steps to make sure that that IP address is not clearly distinguished as a part of any one place. And well, that's not going to work if you're using that for IP address authorization, right? The Seamless Access project did put together a browser FAQ that goes into this aspect in a bit more detail, and it includes pointers to some Apple documentation, because after Apple released this, apparently someone from higher ed did manage to get a hold of them and say, but wait, you just broke our infrastructure. There's instructions that you can give to your networking team, your campus IT networking folks, that will, in a way, disable this for particular IP address ranges. So please feel free to share that far and wide, especially if you know that this is proving to be a problem in your area. Browser fingerprinting. So when last I talked about this, I said I wasn't going to talk about browser fingerprinting because it was kind of out of scope. And since then, I've learned a little bit more that they've actually made progress on how to prevent browser fingerprinting from happening. And I thought it would be interesting to put in here. So browser fingerprinting primarily happens through something called the user agent string. Well, the user agent string is being deprecated in favor of something called the user agent client hints, which offers a different format for how the information about the browser is shared. It minimizes what's available by default, because having some information available is necessary. As we've just talked about, you're going to get a different experience depending on whether you're using Safari or Chrome. And a developer would kind of like to have a little bit of information to help prepare for that. So getting some information is helpful. But any more information, because it used to just, there you go, all the information. Now it's moving the additional detail about the browser and the platform and all the other components to available by request. So there has to be a second call for information. There's nothing preventing that second call from happening, but it's like just additional amount of work that will hopefully separate what's going on in the developer world to encourage people to do the right thing. I don't think there's been any studies yet as to how well that's working or how many times the buy request happens, but at least there's no, it's not, there's no user consent, Andy. It's literally just in the code itself to that the developer can say, send for the user agent client hints and then send a request. No consent at all. More information on it is available at that URL, and I'm pretty sure these slides are going to be available as part of the record of today's session. Okay, so link decoration. This one is as much as third-party cookies are going to be difficult for us in terms of as they go away, what that means and what kinds of things break. Link decoration is the really big deal. This will impact both OpenID Connect and SAML. And depending on how they go about it, we're actually going to have to see changes made down at the protocol level in order to support whatever they might be doing. There's no immediate proposals on the plate, but it's under active discussion just about every other week in a community group within the W3C. You can follow along if you want to see, well, what are they talking about? What do these discussions look like? There is a nav tracking mitigations where they start to talk about that. And there's other material in the privacy CG that you can follow up on to figure out what direction are they taking. I can tell you that at least on the last call I was on about 2 weeks ago, they looked at this and said, you know what, we need to stop trying to make a moral judgment on whether it's good tracking or bad tracking and just say, is it tracking? Because you can't programmatically enable morality in terms of, is this okay or not okay? If you take that stance, then figuring out the mitigations becomes, in a way, a more straightforward problem for the browser, but a much more challenging problem for the protocol developer. So keep an eye on this. This is the big one that can truly break how things happen today. But wait, there's more. So there's a lot of different projects underway to handle pieces of these problems. And the ones I've listed here are the ones that have the ability to impact how the federated authentication services work. If you imagine for a moment that each one of these is like a volcano, an undersea volcano, because they're popping up and they haven't formed enough landmass to connect. There's the first party sets, which will allow an organization to say, here's our list of domains, and you should just feel free to share information between those domains. That's going to be really useful in some contexts. But how will that work with, say, Federated Credential Management API? It's not clear. Nobody knows yet. Well, what about the CHIPS proposal, where cookies have an independent partition state, a way to actually say, these cookies should be available in this context, but these other cookies should be available in that context. How does that relate to any of these other projects? We don't know yet, in part because all of these are under active development right now. They're continually being changed. And there's a community group, there's a couple community groups in the W3C that are trying to figure out, as these move along, these are the new tools in the toolbox. How do we use them together in the different scenarios that we can imagine? So, all right, so about when, what are the timelines here? I don't have access to all the timelines. I mean, we know Apple has already done a lot of work in this space because we've got the announcements, from 2 years ago that said they've turned off third-party cookies and, their plans to be the privacy browser on the web. Similarly, Mozilla, where are they? They don't have a published timeline that I was able to find, but they are somewhere between where Apple is and where Google is. They haven't done everything that Apple has, but they've done more than Google has. Google does actually have a published timeline that they update every month that's in their privacy sandbox space. And that's worth watching and keeping an eye on, because not all of the proposals that are on that page relate to the federated identity component of our show, but they do relate to privacy as Google perceives it. And so that's worth looking at. I do want to put in a quick plug for the W3C's Federated Identity Community Group. I am chair of that group. Full disclosure, Google has offered to, basically sponsor me to do that since I'm an independent contractor. The amount of time it needed, I needed some help being able to do this and still feed my cats. But they don't have any say in how, what I do or how I run the meeting any more than any other community member does. So what's in scope for this particular community group is, we're talking about prototyping changes to federated authentication. We're looking particularly at user agent features and APIs. What we're not doing, what is out of scope at this point, is saying, well, federated identity as a whole construct must be changed into something else, like decentralized identity should become the forefront, and we should just, ignore everything about any other architecture out there. That may be a great place for people to go, but that's not going to help us with the third-party cookie problem right now and the timeline that we have. So we declared that and out of scope at this point. We're not going there. We're also not focused on, well, what does this mean for advertising technology or advertising APIs? There are other community groups out there that are focused on that. And so anytime someone comes and says, well, what about, how is this going to affect advertising? We say, great question, go ask them. We don't know. The charter and README are all available online, and sign up. Joining a community group is free, monetarily free anyway, but there are requirements with regards to agreeing to certain IPR and community behavior, code of conduct kind of things. So there we go. Light at the end of the tunnel. This is a slightly different tunnel than I had last time because I've been having fun with those pictures. The space is, as I said at the start, is very, very active. We need as many use cases regarding, well, how is your product, how is your platform, how is your school using some of these features? How do you, does your learning management system use third-party cookies? If so, could you tell us about it? That being where our focus is right now. Once we get past third-party cookies, the question will be, okay, so link decoration, do you do anything with them that isn't, that we want to take as a specific use case? That will be an interesting conversation as well. And with that, I would love to hear if you have any questions, any comments, and if there will be a survey after the session is over, where you get to say, Heather could use a little bit more practice in public speaking, or, this content was great, or who knows what. But regardless, I really appreciate when you fill those out, because that's the only way I'm going to get feedback to be able to improve what I do and how I present this information to you. So yay for surveys. They're almost as good as polls. There we go. Questions for me?
Looks like there's someone with a raised hand, Heather, on the
I
participant side.
Well, let me stop sharing, because then I'll be able to, then I can see stuff like that.
I just lowered the hand.
So close.
I'd like to ask a question.
Sure, Tony, what's up?
Hi. I'm interested in knowing, I'm a librarian, And of course, we do use IP a lot, and we're moving more to SAML when vendors support it. But are there any major publishers that you're working with, such as Elsevier or Wiley, who are talking about their development efforts along this line?
I get to talk to the big publishers just about every week because they've been like the early implementers for things like seamless access. They know about these changes, but at least so far, a lot of the perspective has been, tell us when you know what we need to do, because they're not ready to be part of the conversation to help design the solution. They want to be part of the conversation to react to the solutions.
That's unfortunate.
I agree. It would be really helpful if they came to the table.
Yeah, they have the clouds. Some of them anyway. So
yeah, I did a session over the summer with the International Association of Scientific, Technical, and Medical Publishers to make sure that, reach out to as many publishers as I could.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions?
There's some questions and comments in the chat, Heather.
Where'd we go? Still trying to figure out what's going to break.
So it sounds like SAML is in pretty good shape.
For now,
SAML's
in pretty good shape because SAML, if the focus right now is on third-party cookies, then SAML doesn't care. At the end of the day, for the most part, SAML doesn't care. But we're now in the early stages of talking about things like link decoration, and oh boy, does SAML care.
Right.
So it's the link decoration conversations primarily happening in the privacy community group. And it's worth going through and just reading through the kinds of comments and discussions they're having.
How is link decoration different from doing a post? I mean, it's both of them are sending data along with the request, right? Well, just that the one is a hidden form submission and the other one is a hidden form submission with the data in the URL or in the URL. So
great question. I don't know.
Okay.
I think perhaps so I don't know enough about what you do in a post to be able to say, can you use the information that's in there for tracking purposes? In the same way that you can with what you might put in the URL, or does the browser interpret it differently?
I don't know either. That's a great question.
Because that would be the fundamental difference, I think. The fact that in post, I would guess it's asking for a specific set of information and only that information, whereas in link decoration, nobody knows. You can't, from the browser can't interpret what you're asking for. So it could be any number of different things. Okay, so let's see, we got that. That was Matthew's question. So figuring out what's going to break, especially the library stuff that's heavily IP based. What I really wanted to do was, and I can't because I'm not affiliated with any institution, is I would love to get an error message for if you have a user who's using the iCloud Plus subscription and they try to get to library content on campus, what error message do they get? I don't know the answer to that, and I would love to get someone to be able to test that for me. Right now, that's probably a small set of users, especially since it's a subscription service. But I would have no difficulty imagining Apple expanding that because they are committed to preventing tracking. So they may very well turn that out into a common feature in their browser at some point. So let's see. Next steps regarding OpenID Connect OAuth issues. Well, you've got two choices. You can wait to see what's going to happen and therefore how you need to react. You can get involved in the conversation such that you can help decide what the direction is going to be. And you can do that from the Privacy CG web layer, or you can even go so far, if you really enjoy specifications, getting involved in the IETF, like the OAuth working group, to say, how does this protocol actually function? The one thing that probably you can't do, and this is across the board, is say, browser vendors, don't do it. Don't stop this particular ability, because they have their motherhood in apple pie. They have to do something about the tracking possibilities. They are being held liable. They are occasionally being sent to court because they enabled tracking behavior to happen. So they have to do something here, regardless of the side effects. They're going to try and mitigate the side effects. That's why we're having these conversations now. That's why the community groups exist. But something is going to have to change. Will we see a rise in the use of back-channel communications between IDPs and SPs? To start, probably. Though one of the things I heard, I was listening to the IMS Global Consortium, which they had a webinar on this late last year, I think. And one of the things that they talked amongst themselves about was this platforms that use the iframes, which is all that front channel component, that may call in different apps, different services from different domains, may have to start trying to figure out how to build themselves as what they called single page applications, such that there were no more iframes being used. It was all in one big happy family of stuff being presented to the user. I suspect that would probably be pretty uncomfortable and ugly, but it's a possibility. That was one thing that they recommended, and otherwise they said, we don't know what to do. Like the OIDC authorization grant. Yep. Questions. So Andy points out, that we're sort of one of the challenges here, of course, is updating protocols takes a really long time. All the protocols we're talking about are built around community consensus. And community consensus, when you get a community the size of say the OpenID Connect or OAuth communities, which expand every sector on the planet, it's a little hard to get consensus. It certainly takes some time. So yeah, that's the rock in the hard place. If the specifications are going to have to be updated, and yet the browser vendors have a timeline, the collision is going to be uncomfortable. Let's see, is there a hand up that I don't see?
There is a hand up. Looks like Anne found those, Chris. So if anybody else has a question, you're welcome to post in the chat or come off of mute.
I wonder why it wasn't showing me the hand up. How strange. Okay, no problem. Are there other questions that I missed? How do we back our it depends on what part you're testing. And if you're talking about testing the IP address stuff, frankly, I don't know how to get that back. Well, I know how to get it back to Apple because I have a lot of back channel information. If you can get it to me, that would be brilliant, and I would be able to distribute it more broadly. I can tell you, if you're on a campus and you can test this and you can show how the breakage pattern is going to happen and get me a screenshot, I would owe you the beverage of your choice. But Apple would probably turn around and say, we have instructions for higher education on how to get around this. And that's in the seamless access browser FAQ that I sent. So that I don't think they would say they're going to change anything. They just tell you what the workaround is. But I still really want that screenshot because I want to see what the break looks like. Are there activities besides WebKit Safari that affect IP address tracking? Right now, not that I'm aware of. I'm trying to think if I've heard any of the other browser vendors say they were going to go there. They haven't explicitly said they are going there at this time that I know, that I've heard. The Safari Plus implementation, is that an always on VPN for the browser? For iCloud Plus subscribers, yeah, the privacy, there's more to it, to the privacy relay. The link in the slides will get you to where you can see more information about that. What else? I love this. This is like this epic pop quiz.
This is great. I love the interaction. We still have a few minutes here. So does anybody else have questions or comments?
If not, Netta, why don't we switch over to you so you can do your last bit? Or, oh wait, 2 more things
Oh,
came
no, they're
across.
still coming.
Ah, look at that.
Just when you them.
Oh, Kevin, I have no idea how these are going to interact with how Apple Plus VPN interacts with Cisco. I mean, it's my first thought is, you know, everything is obviously improved by another layer of obfuscation. So there's no telling. There's no telling. What guarantees do the private relay operators give people about not data mining their traffic? How much do you think people, organizations respect their privacy statements, and how many people do you think read those privacy statements? Which is a snarky way of saying it will probably vary and people won't know unless they read the things that they never read.
Yeah, it just seems like the private relay stuff just moves who's doing the tracking from the people giving you the cookie to the people giving you the VPN tunnel.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's actually a couple of things Apple is doing that falls in those lines. It just blows my mind. I know if you use Apple products and you sign up to you download an app and you want to do a sign up, and Apple says, oh, here, you can use this Apple ID to obfuscate your email address so that they can't track you. The app vendor can't track you. Apple now has like all of these things and can absolutely track you, but it's supposed to be better because you can trust Apple. It's your level of risk. It's what you're comfortable with, right? It all depends. Some people really don't care, because at the, end of the day, Apple doesn't care about you as an individual so much as they care about aggregated information in terms of what people are doing in general. Okay, who wins between Apple and your on-campus IP address? I think that depends on whether you follow the instructions that Apple has made available about what happens to your campus IP address range. Is there an existing federated authentication protocol that isn't affected by these changes? No. But that might be an absolute no, because we'll have to discuss, what do you consider a federated authentication protocol? I mean, do you consider the decentralized identifier models and wallets and things? Especially the ones that use blockchain. I got to say blockchain. But in practice, no, they're all going to be impacted by the changes. Okay, Netta, give us our last 5 minutes of fame, and then let's give people a 5-minute breaks between meetings.
Yes, I like that. I like where you're going. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Heather. I love this. This was a really engaging discussion over chat. I love that people participated, and thanks again for a wonderful encore presentation from Camp Week. We really appreciate it. And we'll be sure again for everybody to share these slides and also a recording on IAM Online. So we know there's a lot to digest there, but you'll be able to review that information at any time, or should you wish to share it with somebody else who might be interested. So I'm gonna share my screen really quick and just go through a few last minute kind of announcements and items before we wrap up our time here together. So let me hit present. A little better there. Great. All right. So again, thanks for joining. We try to hold these webinars monthly. And so we do have our topic lined up for next month. We are going to be meeting on Wednesday, December 8th, if you can join us. And again, that'll be at 2 p.m. Eastern time. The topic will be HECVAT 3.0 launches to outer space. Say what? Plus updated IAM questions. This is going to be a really great example of the community coming together to do good, and it will feature the HECVAT team talking through changes that they've made in partnership with our technical advisory committee from InCommon. So that's going to be a really great discussion. Hope that you can make it, and we'll be sharing some more information soon. And let me see if I can actually get to my next slide. There we go. As Heather mentioned, we do have a Zoom survey. It's really easy. When you close out, it's going to pop up for you, so very convenient. And again, this is really valuable and very much appreciated so that we can have a better understanding of what you like to hear about and, you know, moving forward, what topics might be of interest to you. So feel free to share some feedback on Heather's presentation today, and then also kind of let us know if you have any thoughts around items or topics of interest, and we will definitely take that to heart as we are planning for 2022, which I can't even believe I'm saying that, but here we are close to the end of the year. So please, if you can take some time to fill out that survey, that would be very appreciated and wonderful. Just really quick, coming up toward the end of the year, we have a couple of software workshops. So if you've been interested in deploying some of our software and would like some assistance with that, we can help and walk you through it. We've got you covered. Coming up, we have our Shibboleth training. That is November 15th through 19th. Their registration is still open. So if you're interested in deploying that for a single sign-on, please let us know, and you can go ahead and sign up on our website. And then also we will have a midpoint training later this year. We still have the early bird rates going. So if you're thinking about it, kind of muddling around, jump in. You can get a little discount there for signing up early. And that workshop will actually take place December 7th through 10th. So check it out and let us know if you're interested. IAM Online. So in case you missed it for last year, or excuse me, last year, you see my time is all kerfuddled. But for October, we released 2 other videos. So Heather was nice enough to do a live encore presentation with us today, but we actually re-released the recordings from 2 other camp videos for IAM Online, and you can find those on our website. So if you're interested, and again, we're not able to join us or would like just to kind of listen in and get a refresher on those topics, we have NIH and U, MFA, Identity Assurance, and Coming Requirements, which are present requirements, I should say, on our IAM Online Slack, or excuse me, our YouTube channel. And then also we have Hosted Solutions, Federation, adapters, and evaluating cloud solutions. So those are live, ready to go, and you can go ahead and check those out on IAM Online. Sorry, my computer is being something today. All right, and that's what I have. So without further ado, I will go ahead and wrap this up. Again, thank you for everyone who joined us today, and we will hopefully see you next month on December 8th. Thanks, Heather.